It is now my pleasure to introduce the final panel of the day. This one we're going to be focused on energy, specifically energizing the future. The panel is going to be moderated by Sam Ticknor, who is a principal of Union Hill Advisors. Sam will be joined by Patrick Eilers of Transition Equity Partners, Jim Newman of NOCO Energy Corp, and Jon Williams of Viridi Parente. Thank you, gentlemen. We're looking forward to your conversation.
I was thinking aspirationally yesterday about the transition economy as I was leaving my home office in New Jersey, as my neighbors' lawn folks showed up with all their leaf blowers and lawn mowers. And so I'm eager to hear about this energy transformation and the status that we're going to talk about with our esteemed panelists here, who are local CEOs and a national private equity investor. But let me turn it over to Pat, and each of our speakers can introduce themselves.
Pat Eilers with Transition Equity Partners. We have offices in Chicago and in New York, and opening one in Abu Dhabi over in the Middle East. The firm focuses on renewable energy, clean energy supply and services, and we were grateful for Hamilton Lane. They participated in a transaction we closed last week. It was a solar module manufacturer here in the United States. And personal color, Sam thought this would be interesting. We were talking about had been in Buffalo recently, and I said, well, I think maybe the last time when I played football in another life, and I was a free agent working, trying out, or the Buffalo Bills were working me out back when Marv Levy was coach. So long time ago, got fond memories of having played here. It's a phenomenal city and phenomenal franchise.
You might have been the missing link.
No. I told them they had Steve Tasker, so they were all good.
Hi, I'm Jim Newman, president of NOCO. For those of you here locally, you probably knew us through our C-stores, which we sold 5 years ago, and the story there is really the pivot toward this new future energy world. We're 92 years old. We are basically a hydrocarbon energy distribution company. My younger employees would call me a hydrocarbon dinosaur, but we are trying to make the pivot to the new energy economy. So our role really is that we take energy from the supplier or final wholesale point and take it to the final retail customer, whether it be a home, small business, industrial, or even governmental agencies. But we're the kind of the link to the last mile to the customer. But over the last 4 years, we've really started the pivot toward this new energy world. And so we've added an energy consulting business, which helps people upgrade their lighting, a geothermal business. We are now selling generators. We do home energy audits, commercial HVAC, plumbing. We now are doing EV chargers. We are working on residential solar, and just recently closed on the acquisition of an insulation company. We also have an environmental services business where we help people properly dispose of both liquid and solid waste disposal. Recently invested in a what I call carbon recycler, which is basically taking tree and yard waste, turn into compost, soil amendments, and erosion control socks. And then kind of looking forward, 4 years ago, we bought Shanner Electric, which is an electric component company. And we think that part of the future of the new economy will be how to figure out how to provide electrical components to all the customers who are either being told they have to have this or want to do it on their own choice. So we are looking to the future, and we are trying to move away from the hydrocarbon focus. But I remind my team that we will leave no customer behind as we try to move into the future energy world. There are plenty of opportunities and plenty of challenges. So thank you for inviting me here today.
So Jon Williams, I'm the president and CEO of Viridi. Viridi is Latin for green, so it's a very obvious name for a green energy company. Viridi started quite a while ago. So in 2010, I actually started this development. We did our first funding in 2018, and we just closed our last funding about 2 months ago. So Viridi's raised roughly $150 million in private equity. We have essentially no debt in the company, and our product focuses on not just the transition to green energy, but the efficiency of picking up the waste in carbon energy. So every unit of fossil we use today, we only capture about 20% of its energy, whether it's in a car or in a furnace or anywhere else. The reason for that is that fossil either runs or it doesn't, and because we always want to have energy ready, it always runs. So we looked at battery technology and said, in a macro view, the majority of all investment, R&D, and development goes into EV batteries. Right? We want batteries to be more dense, and we want the car to go farther. But there's a unique convenience we have in a vehicle. We allow vehicles to blow up. Right? If a battery catches on fire and it burns on the side of the highway, we get upset about it, but we don't really regulate against that. That doesn't work anywhere else in our economy. So if you look at our economy in a macro view, 3% of our GDP are passenger vehicles. So all of our R&D, research, development, and work that goes into battery packs for cars can only apply to 3% of our GDP. So we just looked at it and said, well, how do we make a pack work for the other 97%? And there's two things, energy density and safety. So the pack has to be fail-safe, and it can't be a lead-acid battery, because to use a lead-acid battery to power your house, you're going to need a house next to your house. Right? That's not an option. So we took lithium-ion NMC chemistry, which is the most energy-dense and really the most resilient battery technology that we know that we can scale, but it has that little critical fault in it that once in a while it goes into thermal runaway. And we solved for that fault. So today, we have battery systems in the middle of the desert at Burning Man. We have battery systems at airports. There's a large-scale system at HWI in downtown Buffalo here. It's the largest indoor system in the United States right now. And we're just starting to scale manufacturing to really spread that out. But it's been a 10-year development. So my only word of caution to everybody is that this is a massive industry. There's a lot of opportunity, but it's very rare that there are overnight successes in anything.
Okay, thank you. Pat, I'd like to turn it over to you to set the stage here. As an investor with Transition Equity Partners, what is the energy transition market? Why should we care about it? Why should consumers and businesses care about it?
Yeah, I'll just say why people should care is because we want 6 nines reliability, which is something that people in the audience may or may not be familiar with, but it's what takes third world countries and makes them first world countries, is having electricity all the time. And just to take people back, I'm old enough to remember when generation was regulated still in 1999, thereabouts, around the United States. Prior to that, generation was regulated, and that meant that every power pool had 15 to 20% reserve margins, right? So it was you never had to worry about flipping the switch. And then I was in renewables. I previously was with Madison Dearborn out of Chicago, and then BlackRock. And as things have evolved, obviously trying to have sustainable, carbon-free energy there's a lot of attributes to that. And because we had these reserve margins for so long, the proliferation of wind initially was the lowest LCOE, and then solar came in and PV, got going. Battery technology, John, you'd appreciate this. We did the first utility-scale battery out in Maui, Hawaii. When we had a wind farm going there, it was 50% of the grid off-peak. So we had to integrate wind farm that would, if the wind goes up and down, electricity production would follow. So we put a large 10 megawatt lithium-ion battery there, DOE loan guarantee, 18 months to get. I don't wish that on anybody's, on my worst enemies, and it did have thermal runaway. It was in the early days. And then the transition since, I think people now understand everybody wants as carbon-free, as environmentally friendly electricity throughout the economy. but it does come with some drawbacks, and this is what we call at our firm responsible decarbonization. And that means that we still need reliability, we need energy security. So think about what happened in Europe when Ukraine first started going and there wasn't enough natural gas. Countries were paying an exorbitant amount to get natural gas because you just don't have luxury not to have electricity, especially when you think about hospitals and ventilators and keeping people alive. So I think this whole energy transition that's taking place is that quest for the most sustainable, environmentally friendly energy mix, but it's a transition. And we're at our firm, I mentioned we do this decarbonization infrastructure, which is really low carbon and predominantly natural gas infrastructure. That's a transition fuel that provides firming of the grid. And there's places like Texas, you can't do more renewables if you don't have a source of firm generation that allows adoption of more intermittent resources, right? And so my experience is specifically over my career, we've owned a third of New York City's gas-fired generation. We've done a lot of renewable development in the state of New York, wind initially and now solar. So this whole transition's taking place, and I think the reality of the whole circumstance is once you start having rolling brownouts, then regulators and politicians get really concerned. And, there's been times in Texas and or California where they've gotten close to that and sometimes have had to actually experience it. So I think those would be kind of a little bit of my comments, that there's this quest, but then there's pragmatism that has to be layered on top of what we would all like, and it's not counted in months or years or a decade. It's probably a couple decades for this to evolve over time, and we do need people like Jon and his company to keep doing great things on the battery front, because that's how you can handle some of this intermittency, and that's why we work with Argonne National Labs at my firm to identify great companies like Jon and try to bring that technology forward as well.
Great, thank you. We're going to play musical chairs here. Jon, I'm going to go to you now. In terms of to elaborate on your competitive advantage and what you see as this unique market opportunity. And one of the things you had mentioned to me was TAM, the total addressable market for behind the meter and before the meter. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
If you look at our energy mix today, we consume about 55 million barrels of oil a day. The United States only, per day. We have about 30 days of energy supply in our distribution system. So if Saudi Arabia turned off tomorrow, we'd have 30 days of supply before that system would get into a critical distribution situation. But our electric grid, if a car hits a transformer outside on the street, this building goes out, somewhere between 3 to 15 seconds. So we've always accepted our grid as an on-demand system, and we've always relied on fossil as the resiliency. Gas turbines, coal plants, oil plants, nuclear plants. Those are what create resiliency in our distribution supply. Well, we can't do that anymore. And part of the reason is that when you have all that redundancy in the system, today our grid, we use about 4 units of energy for every 10 that we generate, transmit, distribute, and deliver. So if National Grid buys 10 units of energy on the open market, and they transmit those through their distribution, you as a customer only end up buying 4. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's time of day, it's peak, it's transmission loss, it's heat, it's all kinds of stuff. But the reason is that when you turn your lights off, power is still at the edge of that switch waiting to be used. And if you don't use it, it evaporates. It's just the physics of the energy. So what battery storage does is it gives that energy a place to go. Now, when you do it at the grid level, you're upstream. So if you store upstream at grid, you still have to push through the wires and transformers and poles to get to the meter, right? The customer that's actually buying the unit of energy. So when we looked at it, we said, well, if we put the storage behind the meter, you don't have to worry about the upstream congestion, because all you do is you wait for there not to be congestion upstream, and then you draw energy into that storage device. And then when there is congestion, you tell the storage device, provide power to that house and don't draw on the grid. So it just creates a balance. So instead of having an energy supply that looks like this, you have an energy supply that looks like this. And the dynamic to that is we can go from 4 units of energy that we consume today to 8. So we can double the number of delivered units of energy without adding a wire, a pole, or generation. And that brings costs down, it adds resiliency, it does everything we want. Why haven't we done it? Safety, right? We're not going to put a pack in a house and blow up the house. It's just not going to happen. So we drove in on safety, Sam. That was our whole value proposition. We said, if we can use this technology and get safe, it'll work. And to your point, we had a market study done, because whenever you develop a new company, you need an expert to tell you there's a place to sell your stuff. And you spend a lot of money for them to run around and take your opinion and put it into a report. Alex Partners, which is a McKinsey-like firm, did the market study for us. So they focused in on 50 kilowatt hours to 600 kilowatt hours, which is behind the meter in building, C&I only, and AA to AAA C&I tenants. So universities, hospitals, accounting firms, law firms, AA credit type. They estimate the U.S. market alone for 50 to 600 kilowatt hours behind the meter to be a $1.4 trillion market. It was the largest unaddressed market they had ever studied in the history of the firm. Now, it's massive. You got to go after it. You got to do all kinds of stuff. But the point there is you're looking at developments in this market and you're looking at green energy as an opportunity, just look for a place where you can add efficiency. Because all an entrepreneur does is he looks at something and says, okay, we're using 2 bottles of water today, but if I do this, we're only going to use 1. And I can charge half the cost of that second one and put it in my pocket. So when you're looking at investments and developments in this industry, look for places where you can gain efficiency. Jim's doing it by aggregating all of these services for home energy services and putting them under one umbrella so that there's not 10 contractors pulling up to a house. There's one. Right? And in doing that, he picks up the efficiency of those 9 other trucks. So when you're looking at this, it's a massive market. It's going to be the biggest transition that's ever occurred in an economy in the history of humankind. But it can also be daunting because it's such a big opportunity. Focus on something where you can add value. And if you can add value and hold on to part of that, you have a business.
Great, thanks. Okay, Jim. So it's all leading to you now. Tell us about your story of how you got out of the hydrocarbon economy, the owning the house, and some of the challenges and opportunities.
So, as I said, we're not necessarily exiting hydrocarbons. Our customers are exiting hydrocarbons, and therefore they don't want us to provide hydrocarbons. And so what I would say is we're leaving no customer behind, because I think you heard it earlier with Pat that hydrocarbons are still going to be a big part of the energy market in the world, and particularly the United States. We're not going to be able to respond to false cliffs that are prescribed by regulators or panaceas that are involved in state or federal regulations. But we see the consumer demand shifting, and I want to use a story. When I came back to NOCO in the early 90s, we were still primarily an oil company. At that point, there was a lot of 6 oil in the industrial business, a lot of home heat oil, but natural gas was starting to take over in the urban areas, and propane was taking over in the rural areas. And I was sitting in our dispatch area, and I said, to the dispatcher, why is that customer leaving? They said, oh, they'd stay with us, but we don't sell natural gas, and that's the new cleaner burning fuel. And so I remember going to my uncle and father, who were the second generation of our business, and saying we should get into these businesses. And for those who knew my uncle, there were a few cuss words involved with that. National fuel guys are bad, and propane is bad. They're the enemy. It's the competitor. And what I saw was that it wasn't so much that they were bad, as that we didn't do it. So we looked at it as bad. And our customers were asking us if we would get into those businesses, they would buy from us. And I said, that's the lesson that I take today. It's not really what NOCO wants to sell. It's really what do our customers want to buy. And so as we pivot, we want to be the person, the company, the entity that can answer the questions of our customers who say, we would like to be a better global citizen, we would like to be green, we would like to comply with mandates, but we're not sure how to do it and where to go. And since we are their current energy provider, whether it be electric or natural gas or propane or oil, we're a logical person for them to talk to because there is already a relationship. But as Jon said, there is two markets that you all should be focusing on. There's the before the meter, production, transmission, but the after the meter, which is the final user market. And there's two different opportunities within the group that sits here today in those markets. And I think Pat would tell you he understands both, but his company is focused before the meter. Jon's company does both, and ours is really after the meter. We're there talking to the final user. But what I have learned is that mandates don't create demand. So while the state might say that you need to do something by a certain date, that doesn't mean that our customers want to do it or are willing to do it. And the other thing that I would offer, and I've said this to this group, is that a lot of people talk green. They want to talk about being green until it costs them green. And then they're very hesitant to make the decisions. And this is true corporately, and this is true residentially. So when we go out and talk to a customer about their heating system, we would say a conventional natural gas furnace might cost you $8,000, might cost you, but a heat pump, that'll cost you 13 or 14, but it's much more, responsible. The electric cost will be offset. They're focused on the sticker shock of that decision, and their decision is not about saving the world. It's about paying rent and making, school payments and so forth. So their view when they make that decision about whether to be green or not is very, very local. So I echo what Jon said. In this world, you all should be looking for how can we bring economies to the person making that decision. It's different than what Pat's talking about, making the bigger investments, but the technology around making that heat pump more economical. And it isn't just through state subsidies, because those are kind of hard to base an investment on. As I've said, when that person that we're talking to is making the decision about whether to go green or not, their decision is about what is the size of the check I have to write when I make that purchase, not about a tax rebate or a refund I could get 9 months down the road. It is right then and there they make the decision. So what I think the opportunity is this efficiency and economies, all the things we talk about. If we can bring these solutions to the end users for a better economic model, better return. And what I mean, not just because the tax rebate or some kind of government subsidy, but that there's actually an economic driver behind the green decision, and that will come through efficiencies and economies that I think is the opportunity for a group like this. I would say invest in demand savings. One of the things that we focused on is how can we actually reduce the demand of our customers, which is counterintuitive. Wouldn't you want them to buy more of your products? Well, we figure if we're in for the long haul with our customers, that we can bring demand savings, which immediately brings economic savings through insulation, through alternatives, things like geothermal, where they wouldn't have the utility bill they would have if they were with a traditional heating system. These are opportunities for investment that you all are looking at. Demand management, Jon talked a lot about how we manage both the production and usage, and storage is definitely part of the equation there. And new and cheaper production technologies. So I've said, again, if we're going to be a heat pump focused state, why don't we generate heat pump manufacturing in the state versus going out and importing it from other parts of the world or country? So one of the things that I think we face as a local and a global economy is that everybody's trying to go electric at the same time. So in my view, another opportunity for investment is both enhancing the existing supply chains through manufacturing or through aggregation, but we need better supply lines, better manufacturing, and more local. And I mean local by domestic. And so for me, an opportunity to address what I would call an inflationary trend by having more demand than units is to address the supply side to keep the demand price down. So I look at these as opportunities for a sophisticated investment group like this that are not instant, but they're kind of blocking and tackling. They're not really technology-based. Efficiency is a little bit, but just being able to bring more units to the market, being able to talk to people about blocking and tackling like insulation. So I've said to our state, who has their lofty goals, we want to service the less advantaged communities of Buffalo. We want to put heat pumps and electric. I said, forget about whether you can actually get the electric to the neighborhood, but what are you going to do when you put a heat pump on a house that's 100 years old with no insulation? There's actually no energy savings, and the net is going to be greater usage of electricity and probably reliability issues. So to me, there's many things to work on, but I think with this whole displacement, we see opportunity for our company. I think it's the same opportunities that everybody in this room would see. There are places for entrepreneurial spirits to bring greater efficiencies to how we manage, use, produce the whole energy complex. And so that's where we're at.
Great. Okay, so you kind of introduced the next topic, which is capital, the availability of capital to help this growth, because clearly companies need money to drive the transition. Pat, we're going to start with you in terms of just what opportunities you're seeing. And then a second question is, how do you balance the fact that a lot of these technologies take 15 years to really pay back, and that's longer than your investment time horizon?
Yeah, for private equity, which is the industry that I'm in, a 15-year payback typically would not work, right? And it just, and we're trying to service the pension funds, the endowments, family offices, so pension funds. So it's important. In that case, I think that's where government has successfully stepped in at the federal and at the state level. Mm-hmm. For us, and I'll kind of echo a bit what Jon was saying, right? We look for long-term basis differentials, right? So if you think about some of the investments we've made where you might have a 40-year, for us, we had a thematic when I was at BlackRock that gas would become more of a global commodity. Oil was, and we viewed the opportunity to displace coal, especially on an international basis in China, large consumer of coal, putting on almost a coal facility a week, 50 a year. If we could take what is really cheap in a waste product in West Texas called natural gas and deliver it into China that lasts decades, that was a pretty attractive investment opportunity. And we successfully are building the largest infrastructure project in the southern tip of Texas, a company called Next Decade. Another just quick example, and this is how you attract capital, so that's something that lasted a long time. We put money in the development company, and about just over a year ago, they closed on $18.4 billion to start building that with Bechtel, okay? Another example, to Jon's point, on the efficiency side, so we look to manufacture more electricity that's ideally clean and sustainable, but also on the efficiency side. So we're involved with a company called Montana Technologies that lowers the cost of electricity up to 75% for your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And that was a DOE 20-year science project that's now being commercialized. Our partners and investors are General Electric Vernova, Carrier Corporation, and we're commercializing. So it's going to be, it wasn't unique, but it's going to be Carrier powered by AirJoule, just like you have IBM computer, powered by Intel. But so it's these large opportunities to save money and or avoid, incremental costs over time when you think about the politicians and the governments around the world trying to eliminate carbon. There are both the opportunity to save money, but here in New York with Carrier, you guys have Local Law 97, which is a law that in 2030, if you have a building in New York City and you don't lower your carbon footprint, you are being subject to a carbon tax, which makes it's already expensive. It's going to become more expensive in 2030 if you don't lower your cost of electricity for those buildings. And I'd argue the number one draw for electricity is typically HVAC for a building. So that's the real attraction. And when you get to forming capital, it's being able to show the end market demand that is almost certain. And if you can provide the necessary infrastructure, human capital, intellectual property that can arb that opportunity, you can form capital and bring capital in.
Okay, I just have one quick follow-up question. What are your investment parameters? So if a company comes to you seeking capital, what type of revenues, EBITDA, or what are your key gating factors?
Yeah, we're a little bit, I did work at a firm called the Jordan Company, and there was very certain parameters around it. You know, today, our parameters is the company or is the technology accomplishing one of either things that I've talked about? Is there an enormous basis differential that we can solve, we can normalize? Or is there an efficiency gain that we can take advantage of? The one deal that we just closed last week with Hamilton Lane is a company that's the U.S., because of what I talked about earlier, is short electricity. Every single hyperscaler, Amazon, Google, that's trying to build incremental data centers with AI, it's 7x the amount of electricity to run an AI-based data center. We're now, because of what I talked about, people weren't required to build generation for a reserve margin of 15 to 20%. We are very short electricity in the United States. We have about 4 to 5% incremental per year electricity usage that we're going to have to manufacture. There aren't enough power plants in the U.S. to be able to satisfy that today. So we need all of this, right? You guys can come in on this. And, so electricity, great need. Who's going to answer that great need? And one of the lowest, easiest ways there is through a lot of solar. And the government's done some unique things with the Inflation Reduction Act, Sam, that this company that we put money into, it's manufacturing solar panels here domestically. We're short that. And if you are a U.S. manufacturer of, in this case, solar panels, you get a new incentive called the 45X tax credit. And those developers of solar farms, rooftop, C&I, or utility scale out in the field, if they buy domestic content solar panels, they get an incremental 10% ITC on top of a 30%. So 25% more investment tax credit. So we're sold out for the next 4 years now that will presumably perpetuate. So those are the things that, that wasn't a certain size of revenue or EBITDA. Mm-hmm. Most of the things, I guess the one thing we're looking for is long-term certainty of revenue, where we can put, capital in place that satisfies offtake or customer contracts that have real teeth in it, that's either investment grade or there's liquidated damages if they woke up one morning and said, we don't feel like buying more solar panels. One of our largest customers for this facility would have to wire us tens of millions of dollars. So it's not, we would be indifferent, to it. Yep. But we think it's important that we continue to try to meet this electrical demand that we're all going to need, because no one wants to experience rolling brownouts.
In terms of raising capital for companies in this sector, you've been successful, and you've gotten some kind of prominent investors in. Can you talk about that a little bit and some of what they were looking for and how we were able to get these people and the benefits from having these investors?
Yeah, I think in the last 5 years, the green renewable sector has kind of gone through a pretty big swing. 4 years ago, if you were going to grow a leaf, somebody would give you money because it was green. And this whole ESG push created a lot of, I don't call it momentum, but it created a lot of false business premises around green. Right? It was almost, if you were green, you didn't have to have business principles. You could just be green. And what happened is that the reality of business principles caught up with that. right? So it's not enough to be green. You have to be, product's got to be better. It's got to be more renewable, and it's got to cost less. Because, you look at your iPhone, right? We used to have camcorders, and telephones in our house, and we used to have, compasses and all kinds of stuff. Well, who would ever have thought you'd pay $1,000 for a telephone? But it's not a telephone. It's a life device. Right? It allows you to live your life and operate in a much more efficient way. So I think the reason Viridi was successful in raising was, one, I'm invested, right? So as the principal, I have a lot of money in Viridi. So the other investors saw that. But I think more than that, we always focused on business principles. Like, we were honest with our investors. We were never right about our projections. Right? And no, that frustrates me more than anyone. It's just the nature of the market. But we always said to our investors, we're not going to spend money on stupid stuff. We're going to invest in our product. And as we get from A to B, we're going to increase that investment where it is going to show a return. So I think when you're raising money, if you can show a business premise where, it costs $1 today and you can do it for 60 cents, and there's a margin in there that you can realize, that's the first premise, right? You have to show an investor that there is a business here that is economically sustainable. Now, it can be green, but if it's not economically sustainable in the first instance, it doesn't matter. Right? It doesn't matter whether it's oil or sunshine. Right? If it's not going to make money and sustain itself, nobody's going to invest in it. The second premise is you have to show them that your management team and your ability to deliver on that premise. So I have a great idea. I know where the margin is, and I know how I'm going to attack this market. And I have a team around me that can actually realize that idea into a finished product in a business. Sam will tell you this, there is a lot of money out there, but people make the mistake of thinking money is not sophisticated. There is no dumb money in this world. I mean, if somebody made money and they put it into a firm and they trusted somebody to invest it, there are very smart people making decisions about how that money is invested. And if you're going to go to smart people and ask for money, you need to show them that you can deliver on that. So take it seriously. That's all. Just don't be casual about it.
So Jim, you haven't taken outside capital. How do you think of capital? And I know you've acquired some companies and you have some thoughts. You made an observation about how some venture capitalists are actually coming in upstate New York, consolidating some of the suppliers, which is pretty interesting.
Oh, I think the venture, that's a nationwide where I think venture money starts to see the value and that some of these electrical component either manufacturers or have, and they, of course, can bring economies to that model by scale. Where I think we as a non-venture company face a restriction is that the new industries, and not so much technology, but even as we go into starting to expand our business, our traditional lenders want it to be a scaled, already running business, as opposed to many of these for us are greenfields where we might hire 2 or 3 key people. We might buy a small business and then bring it into our infrastructure and scale it. But there's always a startup period that I don't think commercial banks have the patience, appetite. I don't know what the word is. I have negative words I would use, vision maybe, but it's not their model. And so a company like ours is a bit of a crossroads where we could continue to acquire commodity-based businesses, and that would easily fit into the commercial underwriting. But much of what we're trying to do in our pivot doesn't fall cleanly into a commercial underwriting. And therefore, that's why, Sam, I was talking about that we need an alternative vehicle to finance these new businesses. And, it's usually a 2-year incubation first to kind of get them up and going, and then you really start to get the business model pumping through. But what we have found is that as we invested in these businesses, it took away from the availability of our commodity business, which is fine when crude's $70, but it's not when it's 120. And we kind of learned that during what I call it the Ukraine experiment, where all commodities went through the roof. And if you're borrowing, as we were on an ABL line, you can find available capital for new businesses can be constrained, or you're being punished by your bank because they said you should not have made those investments getting ready for $120 crude market. They're not wrong, but for us, we want to do both. We want to continue to service and participate in our commodity business, but we also want to start to pivot into these new businesses. And so and I said this to Sam earlier, I'm not sure how we would bring venture into our company other than setting up a separate company, which is really what we have. We call it an emerging business and our commodity or our existing old line business. And they're just different businesses and they're different in what they do, but they're also different in terms of maturity levels. And so like, for instance, heat pumps, everybody says, oh, it's a proven technology, but that's not met with customer acceptance. Just because you can point to Germany or Norway, that doesn't mean that it works in Buffalo, because there's the misnomer, well, if it gets cold, heat pumps won't work. And I said, what I'm more worried about is that heat pumps won't be able to get electricity because of the demand on the grid for the things that Pat's talking about. There's a lot of new uses, not just data centers, but everybody's starting to put in chargers. And so the idea would be that there's a skepticism about that. So it isn't like if we were to go out and buy a traditional HVAC company, we could start selling furnaces right away. Electric heat pumps are going to take a while to become accepted by the general consumer. And then there's the price point, right? So we've talked about, and Jon actually gave me a good idea talking this morning about, you should set up your own equipment financing company, because our customers want to go buy a heat pump. They can't go to their mortgage lender, and many lenders don't want to be in a second position behind the primary mortgage. So how does the consumer finance that? And so for me, I see an opportunity in terms of how we pivot. But we're a closely held business, and we have not participated in the venture capital, which is why I asked one of my hosts, are you sure you want me here? But we are definitely in the middle of this energy pivot, and we see all kinds of opportunity. And if I'm in the audience's shoes, I think Jon said it best, you got to find that one place where you really have either a partner or an investment that is somehow bringing value in the immediate market, not to say that it will pay off in the immediate term, but that you have a longer term horizon where you can bring value. And I think there's all kinds of opportunity in this new energy world, whether you call it green, alternative, future. There's just all kinds of displacement. And what I mean by that is how we do it now is going to be different in 10 years. And who's going to get us to that 10-year change is where the opportunity for investment. So we're doing it on a much smaller, more intimate kind of customer to customer. But we're looking for places that we can bring other people's technology to our customers. And for that, we're in need of capital. And so, Sam, I don't know how to answer your question, because we are not out raising billions of dollars. That's just not what we do. But we are trying to bring the technologies that, say, Pat's investments or Jon's company would be able to bring to their customer, right? And that's where we see our value.
What government agencies are doing a good job, maybe around the world, that we could think about as example for folks here in upstate New York, to use as a model. And we were throwing around that, the world of acronyms, RIMS and things like that, and CLCPA and NYSERDA. Do you want to start? Because I know you've been thinking about that a little bit.
The thing that comes with 5 minutes, and to keep it brief, not to use all the time.
That's why I waited to the end.
I'll do it in 1 minute for me, and welcome the fellow panelists here. I was on the phone yesterday with Argonne National Lab, who works closely with the Department of Energy, right? And they're part of the Department of Energy. And there is obviously a big concern with China and in lithium ion supply. And there's a couple companies, one in particular, where they're doing a sodium ion, new technology. You probably be familiar with it, Jon, that came out of the DOE, the ARPA-E program there. And it's really critical to the United States of America that we, find a way not to be dependent on China. They're very concerned in Washington, D.C., just from a national security level. I'm not sure that, I'm not being political at all. I'm just saying that's the reality in D.C. And so we're looking at a way to make sure that we can provide the needed energy, electricity to the United States of America and not be dependent on the rest of the world. It's an energy security concern.
The leading state in the nation for energy is California. And the misnomer about California is we beat up on them all the time, right? We say San Francisco's a mess. California is the 5th largest economy in the world. As a state, they're the 5th largest economy in the world. 20 years ago, before they started on their energy march, they were the 10th largest economy in the world. So California has moved up 5 places in the world by focusing in on renewable energy and investing as a state in those technologies. Okay? There's 40 million people in California. They have more registered vehicles than any other state has people. California has 32 million registered vehicles on the road every day. They're registering 1,500 EVs a day right now. Now, California has significant programs in green energy. I mean, our product, we sell more of our product in California than we do anywhere else because they have a core program where they give you a rebate based on kilowatt hours of renewable energy. So, look at it. I think there's a lot of stuff going on here, right? There's a myth that if you invest in green energy, it somehow is a gift or a government handout. And the point that you made earlier, Pat, was government has a role to get these industries started, right? And state governments and federal governments need to do that. But once they start it, those technologies have to be economically viable. So government's role is throw a bunch of stuff against the wall so the industry can figure out what's going to stick. And once it sticks, give the industry the space and the room and the regulation to run.
As a New York-based company, I'm extremely frustrated with the lack of sophistication that New York State has taken to the climate action movement. I've spent a lot of time talking to legislators, regulators. I like the goals. I'd like to be a global citizen who is concerned about the environment and emissions, but the lack of a solid plan other than just promulgating end goals and trying to let the private industry figure it out is very frustrating. And I'm worried for New York State and that the uncertainty that we're creating in our energy markets is going to drive out employers who have other places in the United States or the world where they can operate their businesses. I think we should be like California. We should be really good at this. And yeah, we all bash California for some of the stuff, but as Jon said, they're successful. What we say is that Europe gets it right, California takes it to the U.S., and everybody else screws it up. And I think New York State is also a huge economy and also has an opportunity to lead the world in some of the things that we could do here. But what I find is it's poorly thought through, poorly implemented. And I say this as a closing point, that the legislators in this state don't want to raise their hand and say this doesn't make sense because they'll get painted as a global warmist. The agencies that we deal with, the people are earnest, but they have no clue what they're trying to do. And so these plans are mishmash. It's very hard for the investment community to line up around it. And I just think that New York State could do better. And as Jon knows, because he's been on some of the calls, privately, many of the legislators say they don't really understand it. And what I've said, until you've signed a paycheck, you don't understand what you're asking industry to do. But I think as a citizen of New York State, we should all demand that the state have a really good plan and allow people like us to go execute the plan, make the proper investments, bring the proper technologies, nurture the businesses, as opposed to these cliffs that have really no roadmap to get there. And so for me, and I've said it more pointedly on the private calls, I am very frustrated with what could be an opportunity to make New York State a destination state for green technology. We have the money here. We have the citizenry. We don't have as many as California, but when you think about it, we're still the 5th or 6th largest state population. I think we're the 3rd largest economy. So we have plenty of juice here. We just have a really, really poor plan to get there. And that's very frustrating for me.
I may just say in closing, my last comments are some of the best things that happen if it's state-driven, federal-driven, especially from a political or regulatory standpoint, give investors and companies tenor, time. Whatever the rules are, give us time. If you give us time, not 2 or 3 years, to Jim's point, but some of the things that came through the Inflation Reduction Act or IRA bill, they'd put it in place for 10 years. It's taken up to 2 years to implement some of those laws, actually get them implemented through Treasury, adopted by industry. Give us time, but with time, the benefit of where we all are really lucky enough to live in the U.S., the capital markets here, the flow of capital, things that everybody in this room is doing to advance what we all enjoy. That to me is, if you go, I've traveled around the world quite a bit with BlackRock when I was there and still am. That's what that's something that we can really be proud of, and we can advance these businesses and improve society. But I think when you talk about the intervention, if they can give us time, we can then know how to allocate risk capital to, bring to society what is helping us all provide a real sustainable, more environmentally friendly energy mix.